Cool, great. Well, hello. For those of you who may not know me, because I'm the guy who's normally at the back, so you won't probably have seen me before, you know Mike a lot more. My name's Harvey. I am sound engineer here at Soul Survivor Watford. This is my wife Jess. She's a worship leader as well. I ran this presentation through her and she said it was very sweet. So, and she's a worship leader as well, so she keeps me in check a bit, which is great. We had an ongoing debate a while ago, cat versus dog. I voted cat, she voted dog. We did a big Facebook poll and dog won, but we compromised and got a cat. So here's our cat called Woody. So yeah, that's cool. I like playing squash. I just beat my mate here, Callum. That was good fun. I am all into my gadgets and electronics at home. So we had a fish tank. I automated it, made a little electronics box which I could control from my phone, the lighting, all this sort of thing. A week after I put that electronics in, all the fish died. But for a long time, I worked for SFL for about 5-6 years. I'm now like a software developer during the week, and I kind of freelance sound. So I've done lots of big stuff, like Mike said, at the Albert Hall and for other big names like that, which is where I learned a lot of this stuff. But the key thing is the Soul Survivor Festivals, which is where I learned a lot of the skills I'm going to share with you guys today. The main thing I wanted to focus on though in this session, and it's called Production for Praise, I called it stuff that we've learned the hard way so you don't have to, is kind of like the live stream side of things, because that is the thing that probably for a lot of us is very new from the pandemic side of things. So what I did is I asked our sound team for a load of tips and advice and things they would want to share with you if they were doing this talk, and they gave me a long WhatsApp list. So I've kind of condensed that down. I'm going to try and share loads of tips with you guys in the next 45 minutes, then we'll leave a bit of time for question and answer at the end. Just to mention as well, I'm going to use our live stream as examples, but this is not like, I'm going to say the words, this is not gospel. That sounds awful, but it's not. This is just what's worked for us. So what will work for you might be completely different, or it could be very similar. So I'm not saying this is the right way to do it. I'm just saying these are tips that we've learned. So take away from it what you want and ignore what doesn't help, if that makes sense. Is that all right? Cool. So one of the things I want to start with is the kind of why, and I'll put up lots of silly pictures to keep you engaged. So it says, my vision is excellent. You can look at that on the small TV. The thing I think I want to focus on for a few minutes is what makes the live stream at Soul Survivor what it is. Well, because we gave it some thought at the start. We just sort of started doing the live stream and didn't really think about what did we want to convey, how did we want to kind of actually get the live stream going, what does it look like, and what are our important values for the live stream. So I just want to share some of those, and then we'll go into kind of a bit more of the technical side of things for like half an hour or so. So one of the things that's really important for us is, which we noticed quite early on, is vocal-led worship. And I know that sounds silly because worship is inherently vocal-led, but I think the thing that we found very early on, we were kind of pre-recording our live streams and then sort of playing them out on YouTube on the Sunday. And one of the things we started doing in our kind of sound mix is putting the vocals really loud and the band quite a bit lower than we probably otherwise normally do. And for some reason, a lot of people just really connected with that, and it kind of not surprised us, but we were a bit like, oh, this is intriguing. I think we might be onto something here a little bit. I think we've learned through reflection is it kind of provides like a really kind of, it's a strong thing for the congregation to hook into, particularly if you're at home watching on your laptop or your phone or something. It kind of gives you that sense that you're back in the church building, if that makes sense. When we're kind of talking about pre-recording here, where we've got a few vocals and we haven't got a congregation live. So I want to show you an example of that. It's a bit like Mike said, the lyrics are the most important part in worship. You'll have all heard it before, I'm sure, but it's the Great Is He song. So like when we mix this, just have a listen to sort of how strong the vocals are in it. Oh, don't die on me now, internet. Oh, this could be awkward. I'll give it another refresh. If not, I'll connect to my phone. Bear with, please. Oh no. Let me just quickly try jumping on my phone hotspot instead, because that may be another option. Sorry about this, everyone. I'll talk around it while I'm doing it. Yeah, it was just something that we cottoned onto really quickly, and it really worked for us. And we've tried to do that. You might have heard it a little bit earlier when it was during the session. I tend to also do similar on front of house now as well, because it just helps give a lot of direction. So let's try this one. So it's 3 vocals and a worship leader, but they're very loud compared to the band, and it just gives a really strong thing for people to hook into. I'm conscious of time here, so I'll keep going on. But one of the things as well that was quite interesting is typically, a long time ago, we'd have the worship leader this loud, the backing vocals this loud, and the band sort of near them. So what we've essentially done is brought the backing vocals up to very close to the worship leader level. The worship leader, as you might have heard there and earlier, is actually just slightly louder, so that they are leading, but it's kind of like a only just, if you know what I mean. So that's one thing that we learned very early on is really important. This one's a big one for us, and you will know if you know Soul Survivor, it's very key. It's not polished, but it's authentic. And by not polished, that doesn't mean that it can't be professional, and the production quality and value can be really good. So we're not aiming for perfection. I think one thing we also learned quite early on with the live stream stuff is people are kind of drawn to authenticity because it builds trust, because it feels real and it's like normal life. I think people very quickly can pick up if you're trying to put on a professional glossy front when really that isn't who you are. So that was one thing we were quite keen to try and avoid very early on. Like I put the words like authenticity cultivates trust. And we've definitely seen that because a lot of people really kind of comment that our live stream is quite raw and stuff. So I think a really good example of this as well is this bit, and it's just, yeah. I'll just show you this bit.
Darkness and sin and brokenness and death. And as we remember, we light a candle in order to...
You might have seen it.
As the candle shines, so Jesus shines in our darkness.
Andy loses it, it's great.
I've got a spare.
Classic user error.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you have any feedback?
Well, it's quite funny because I could just watch that over and over. What's quite funny is I think someone did actually show that clip to one of their friends who's a non-Christian and like, oh, look at this, isn't this funny? And I think they actually started, that I think I remember, I'll have to ask Mike or Andy, but I think that person started kind of watching the live stream because they were a bit more intrigued in it. So even that was just a really good inroad. But I love it because it's like, yeah, I think it just sums up that it's not polished, but it's authentic. And reality as well. That's what your plan is. In reality, that's what it'll be like. So a lot of this kind of not polished as well. I'm not just talking about Mike and Andy and what they're doing or the worship band. It's also the technical side of things because we've had problems left, right and centre all the time. And like, that's just part of this as well. So don't worry if you have those problems. Reality is it's going to look something like that. A bit like I was just mentioning as well, I think the live stream we learned is a really good way for kind of it to become accessible and almost introductory, like a taster to church. So like I just mentioned about that clip, people sort of start watching. So I think there was a non-Christian who started watching our live stream because he was intrigued. And one of the things that he mentioned was he wanted to see if that's what it was really like in the church. So he came along, and I think he's still non-Christian, but he's like attending Alpha now. So it's a really good way for people to sort of just see what church is like from kind of the comfort and safety of their own home. It's not, I personally don't think it is a complete replacement for church, because church for me is community and people and ministry and prayer and stuff. But it is a brilliant way, particularly like, you know, if you've got people who are like ill at home or anything like that, then, you know, that's definitely one thing that we've noticed as well. I put there as well, it should represent well what's going on in the room, but I think I've got another slide on that, so I'll talk around that. So, the other thing that we've been really keen on, particularly from not so much the pre-record, because obviously it's a bit different, but if you're broadcasting or live streaming what's going on in the room itself, the key thing is being transparent and sensitive. So what we don't want to do is be like, what we want the live stream to reflect in both the audio and the video is what's really going on in the room. So like I mentioned, that person wanted to see what church is like. That's what we're trying to reflect, is actually what's going on in the room. We're not hyping anything up. We're not trying to do ridiculously crazy arty camera angles. We've not got loads of flashy graphics going on. We haven't got like crazy background music or anything like that. It's just trying to represent what is in the room. So the thing as well is the sensitive. So particularly like during ministry where people are having deep prayer, or there might be like, people might be crying or anything like that, it's not sensitive to go and put like a camera up in their face, is it? So it's finding that balance as well as communicating what's going on in the room. So you might be then sticking to wide shots, or just cutting to people on the stage, or maybe bringing the ambient mics down. Things like that is also something that we've learned, because we want to represent the ministry time's going on, but we also want to give people privacy. So it's a weird thing to give people privacy in a room when there's 100, 200, 500 people in there. Do you know what I mean? So that's an interesting balance to try and strike as well. I think one thing that particularly for me, like how crazy the world is at the moment with like wars and pandemics and financial crisis and energy crisis and all this sort of thing. I think one of the things that I particularly personally found for the live stream, because when I was, I didn't do every week, and at home I was watching it, and it kind of reminded me of this passage in 1 Samuel 16, where it talks about some of Saul's servants said to him, "A tormenting spirit from God is troubling you. Let us find a good musician to play the harp whenever the tormenting spirit troubles you. He will play soothing music and you will soon be well again." So they go and find that person a bit later. He says, and whenever the tormenting spirit from God troubled Saul, David would play the harp, then Saul would feel better and the tormenting spirit would go away. And I kind of felt, for me, a little bit, I kind of feel like I connected with that, because that's what it was like kind of watching the live stream a bit. It was kind of like, I kind of feel like I'm back at church again. So that was one thing. I also thought of this verse, which is Psalm 150. It talks about praising him on, praise him in the mighty heavens, praise him for his acts of power, praise him on the trumpet and the harp, the lyre. And I kind of feel like, you're not supposed to change the Bible, but if you could add on to the end of that, praise him on the sound desk or the visuals desk or whatever, like I think that's what we're doing as well. We're kind of worshipping as techs or whoever. So yeah, that was important for me as well. Just in terms of practically, how do we do this? There's a picture of me there thinking, have I left the iron on? Like pondering. But the key thing is, like, it's kind of having your spiritual ears open as well as your physical ears. So sometimes I've been mixing, I'm like, oh gosh, I just feel prompted to turn up this instrument. And I don't know why, because it doesn't make sense, but I really feel like I should do that. And kind of doing that, it felt like something changed. And I just feel like if you're listening to God in the mix, like when you're mixing or whatever, that really helps. And if you also know the direction of your worship leader. So I've got a good relationship with Tom, so I kind of know where he might be going. Similarly, like Paul plays keys with Tom, and you kind of get a feel, don't you, for where he's going to go and what song he's going to do. So when you do that, there's kind of this harmony that exists. You kind of are part of the band. So for me, that's really important as well. And the key thing that my old boss used to tell me when I worked at SFL is it's not just about how good the kick drum sounds. And 17-year-old Harvey wouldn't believe him at the time. He was like, no, it must be. So I carried on tweaking away and ignored him. But actually, there's so much more to it than that. It's not about how technically good something sounds. It's a bit like Mike alluded to. It's not, you can have the most technically brilliant worship, but actually there could be nothing really behind it. So we're really trying to avoid that, if that makes sense. So yeah. Another massive one that we've learned the hard way is change management. So you may have all gone through this, but one of the important things we did early on is upgrade some of our sound system and like getting some new sound desks and stuff. But that wasn't just as simple as buying them and putting them down and off you go team, let's use it and everything will be better. It took a lot of time and training and investment to get the team up to the level they're at now. Like the other important thing is, if you think about your staircase at home, it's not one giant step and then one giant step and you're there. It's lots of little steps to get higher up. So that's one of the things that I was really keen with our sound team, was to ensure that we're only making small to maybe medium-sized changes at a time so that they could feel like they're on board and they know what's going on. So it's like, what are we changing? Why are we changing it? And how does that affect me? So like, what, why, how? So whenever we'd change something, I'd be like, what's changing? This is the thing we're changing. Like, we're adding a new sound desk upstairs to do the broadcast mix. Why are we doing that? Well, it helps us to give better control. It helps us to have a separate place where we can listen and mix without having to bother the person in the room, etc., etc. How does that affect me? We need to train you all up on this new desk so you understand what to do, what to press, how it works. So things like that, as soon as you communicate this stuff with people, they feel like they're coming on the journey with you. If you're just saying, right, we're going to make this change, that's what we're doing. Why? Just that's what we're doing. Then instantly you've lost them. Do you know what I mean? So that was really important to keep our team on board and connected with that. So that's important. On that note, it's a bit of a technical one. Have I jumped a bit? Yeah, I've got my slides in the wrong order, sorry. That kind of sums up most of like the vision side of things and the why and stuff. I just wanted to mention one other thing on the kind of vision side of things, which I saw this posted on Facebook the other day, and I just massively connected with it because it felt so important for the time. It's this post-it note that someone said they just found stuck on the inside of their sound booth. You probably can't read it all because of the distance away, so I'll read it out to you. And it almost felt semi-passive aggressive, but I was like, there's such truth in it. It says, they fell in love with the ministry of Jesus instead of the Jesus of their ministry, and they got burnt out and made stupid decisions. And for me, it was like, oh gosh, that's really convicting. I don't know about you, but sometimes, particularly because I'm like, I do kind of sound freelance as well, so it's very easy to get wrapped up in the, oh, this is cool, I'm doing a sound gig, or like, oh, this is cool, I'm doing sound for like this or that. And you become more focused on that, the ministry, rather than Jesus. And you can lose sight of that so quickly. So this is something that has been really key, I think, for our team and us as a church, is to always have our eyes on Jesus with everything we're doing. And whatever we put in and implement is all to focus on him. So yeah, that was quite a challenging thing that I saw the other day. I'm going to move on to the how now, which is the technical side of things. So some of the questions about how do we actually implement this stuff. So that was kind of a lot to do with the why, and this is more the how, the technical side of it. So one of the key things for me as a sound person is the kind of sound check and rehearsal time. I really like this kind of picture here, it's a little fun. Not bad, guys. Now let's do one more take with more emphasis on tone, harmony, melody, rhythm, composition, lyrics, musicianship, tempo, and originality. Sometimes I feel like saying that to the band, but I probably wouldn't. So like, this is an important time where you're sound checking and rehearsing. Like, this is your time to make it happen, because once the service starts, it's very difficult to make big drastic changes. One disclaimer that I'd love to just mention in the politest terms is a normal sound engineer, it doesn't matter how, whatever, if what the band is giving you isn't particularly good, then you're always going to get particularly bad out. Even the best sound engineer in the world will only ever be able to add lots of sparkles to it, and it still won't be particularly good coming out, okay? So it's half a joke, but there's truth in it. So one of the important things I've learned the hard way is actually you need to understand how difficult your job is. Because like I just said, if you've got bad sound coming in, you're always going to have bad sound coming out. It doesn't matter, there's not really anything you can do other than put a CD on and press play. If you've got good sound coming in, you have loads of power, and it's very easy to completely screw it up and make a mess of it, and you end up with bad sound coming out the other side of it. So it's only in the kind of optimal scenario where you have good sound from the band coming in, you do your job really well, and you have good sound coming out. So it is a difficult task, it is really hard, and you sometimes need to know the difference of, am I doing a bad job, or is the band doing a bad job? And or is it a bit of a combination of both or neither? So sometimes there are things you can't fix as a sound person, and you just need to accept that and work with the band to improve that. Sometimes there is things you can fix under your control, and you need to recognise those things and work on them, okay? I wanted to talk about what sound check normally looks like for me. I'm quite a methodical, logical person, so I typically take things step by step. So there's kind of two parts to it. The sound check is the bit where I go through each instrument or input or vocal one by one in turn on the stage. I'll go, okay, let's have the kick drum, do my things to that, then a snare and so on, and then do keys and bass, and then the worship leader, and then BV and BV and BV. You do it one by one because you can find problems with each one of those. I was going to say you can find problems with each one of those people. You can go through and you can identify if there's any problems with that particular instrument. And then once you get them rehearsing, that's when you glue it all together. So when I'm going through them one by one, these are the things on the sound desk that I'm tweaking. Number one is the gain. And this is the thing you tweak at the top of the desk usually, and it affects how much level you've got coming in. So normally we're aiming for a good kind of just tickling into the orange, what we often term as -18 on digital desk. But getting good gain coming in is really important. That's step one. Step two that I do is EQ. Now, EQ, you'll all have seen it looks different on lots of different desks, but this is the thing where you're sort of correcting the tone or adjusting the kind of, the timbre of the instrument or the vocal. At this point in time, I'm kind of just, that vocal sounds a bit muddy, I'll make that a bit less muddy, and this bit needs a bit more like top end there, or that kick drum doesn't sound great, and I'm just tweaking it to change the tone of the instrument or input at that point in time. Yes?
I just have a quick question. So every Sunday when you've got maybe a slightly different band playing with different, with our modern systems, when we save and you save it, do you still go through all of this at the start?
Good question.
Do you trust on what you've done?
I still go through this, but I can go through it a lot quicker because it's likely to be set roughly right from the last time it was run, hopefully, if we've kind of got a starting point. I normally will still, just for sanity, go through it because you don't know that I didn't come to your church in the week and went like this and tweaked it all. Normally you can sort of flick through the channels and check, but yeah, great question. I still do it because you don't know if someone's going to turn up with a cold one week, is nasally, if Bethlen's singing. But so like it's just really good because for my peace of mind, once I get to the end of these steps, I'm like, I know that input's good, and it's just a sound, because you'd be surprised even when things are preset and saved from last week how many things you spot as you're going. It doesn't take too long as well if you get quick at it. I'll talk a little bit more on EQ in a bit. I'll show you some examples. The next thing I tend to do, you're probably thinking, oh, I'm missing a step here, compression. I'll talk about that in a minute, is popping the level up. So like the fader up and getting it in the room. I mean, you've probably already turned it up to hear the changes, but I'm sort of getting my level right and getting a feel for how loud it is in the room when I put the fader up. I'll tweak more of that in a bit with rehearsal, which I'll mention in a sec, but then I kind of look at compression later. It's quite easy to go, oh, I've got a compressor on my channel, I must use it because it's there. It's quite easy for us to all go, oh, we've got all these things on the channel, we must use every single one to try and make it sound as good as possible. But actually compression is really helpful later down the line when you need things to stay sat in the mix where you put them. So if you find a vocal is often getting louder too quiet or louder too quiet, that's a good candidate for compression, because what it can do is it can help reduce how dynamic that vocal is, so that when you turn the fader up, they kind of stay sat roughly where your fader is. So that's kind of what I use compression for. I've got a slide in a second to show you the differences between the two. One thing that I've learned in my, hold on, let me show my animation. Boom! One of the things that I learned a long time ago is it's very easy to do that step-by-step thing, and then you say to the band, hey guys, go for it, you guys can rehearse, you push the faders up and they start and you're like, oh my gosh, that's the worst sounding thing I've ever heard in my life. And you just panic and you don't really know where to start. And kind of what I've taught myself over time is to like just what I call snowballing it. So you're just changing one thing at a time. So I'll listen to this terrible sounding mix and go, what's the thing that pokes out to me straight away as the problem? I can't hear the vocals. Let's fix that. So I might turn the vocals up a bit. What's the next thing? I don't know. Keys is playing. Okay, well, Paul's playing, so we can't fix that. The next thing. That's a joke. But I'm just making one decision after another, and then your snowball sort of grows and your mix gets better. So one tip as well that I learned very early on is literally just look at the people in the band and go, okay, I can see drums. Can I hear them? Yeah. Bass? No, I can't hear bass. So you work on that. And then you just literally look at every instrument on stage, and then you're just tweaking the mix. Because normally if you can see everything and you can hear everything, you've probably got quite a good mix going together. If you're looking at things, particularly on a live stream, people at home, and they're looking and they're seeing an electric guitarist or a keyboard player and they can't hear them, it's very disconcerting from a kind of like psychological point of view, because your brain sees something, expects to hear it, and you don't hear it. So it's a really simple trick to just look, tweak, go. So that's why I put this bit up, which is input by input, like I mentioned, is you're getting your ingredients together. You're making sure your eggs are still fresh and they're not broken and stuff. And you've got your milk and it's still in date and so on and so forth. And then the rehearsal is making your omelette. You put it all together, you're cracking your eggs and you're tweaking it, because just because you've gone through each individual thing, you need to make them all work together in the right levels and quantities and stuff like that. You might go back through and change your EQ at this point as well, because you might have done something to make it sound good on its own, but you realise when you turn it up in context of the whole mix, it doesn't quite sound right, and you need to, like I said earlier, you might be cutting a lot of bass out of the vocal, but you need to put a bit more bass back in for it to sound right in the mix. So that's the kind of thing that I tend to do. So like input by input, make sure they're all good, get them to rehearse, make lots of little changes one after another to make it come together as a mix. Does that make sense? Is that all good? Cool. Here you go. So this is the thing I was mentioning about the differences between EQ and compression. So the way to think about it is an EQ, and sometimes it looks like that, sometimes it's kind of physical dials if you've got an analog desk. EQ is the thing that you're useful for tone, okay, of the input or the instrument or the vocal. Compression is the thing that's useful for the volume or the level of it, okay? That's what the two of them do. It's quite a different job that each of them do. Sometimes they can affect one another, but we'll ignore that for the purposes of the talk. So that's sort of, if you think, well, it's sometimes too loud and sometimes too quiet, maybe look at the compressor. Or if you're thinking, oh, this sounds a bit muddy or boxy or something, you want to look at your EQ. So those are the kind of way to differentiate between them. Another thing I was going to briefly mention on, because a lot of people always find this quite interesting, is vocal microphones, and how much do you spend on one and what's a good one and so on and so forth. The reason I just put this slide up is there is a massive range right at the kind of lower end, 40, 30 quid. You can spend right up to 470 quid at the other end. This isn't even like the complete list. There's hundreds out there, okay? So, and different engineers have their own personal flavors and different things work right for different vocalists and stuff like that. So I don't think you're gonna all immediately benefit by just going and buying the top end microphones. Equally, on the flip side of that, the cheapest microphones aren't gonna sound the best. So I haven't really got an answer here for you, but I think you kind of got to divide it almost into the budget, the kind of mid-range, and then the kind of premium end of things. There's not much point having the premium end if what it's being plugged into is the budget end, in a sense. You've kind of, it's a kind of, you got to think about like a bottleneck. So sometimes it makes more sense to upgrade other areas before it does others. But I'm not going to go into that necessarily now, because it's a whole other topic in itself. But the SM58 is probably one that you've all got in your church, and it's still a brilliant mic, still industry standard, we still use it everywhere. Absolutely nothing wrong with it. As you move up here, you're going to just end up with the vocals sounding, and they might just pop through a little bit more, and it might just have a little bit more top end kind of air and silkiness, and kind of an effortless sound to them that you don't quite get with this. But that I'm talking about is probably the 5 or 10% difference, if that it's going to make to your live stream mix. A lot of these tips I'll share with you are going to make much more of a difference than upgrading your vocal mic. So don't think you need to spend a load of money in order for your kind of live stream quality to improve. Does that make sense? One thing I want to talk about as well is EQ, because that's always something that people get quite hung up on, and what do I do and how do I change it? So just a tip around this for you guys. I'm just, by the way, trying to throw loads of tips at you in this hour because it's already 12:30 and I'm just trying to give you loads of info, so something might stick. EQ wise, we kind of, as sound engineers, we're quite simple. So we divide it into 4 sections. You've kind of got your low mid, your high mid, and your high. So it's kind of 4 bands that you can work with. And the key thing is you don't actually always need to make a change in every single one of them. Sometimes, like, actually you can just leave it flat and not do anything with your EQ at all. Particularly if you've got good musicians, and it pains me to say this, but like Paul, for example, his keyboard, I haven't done an EQ on it at all early today. And some people might be like, well, you're a sound engineer, you should be doing that. So, well, actually no, like what he's given me is just right. I'm going to leave it as is. I don't need to go and tweak every single thing in it. Sometimes actually, the more you hack out of it with your EQ or boost or change, the worse the whole thing can sound. So sometimes actually it's better to not get in the way of it. So like I said there, yeah. One thing that's useful, this is another thing that the 7 bad EQ dwarves. Someone might come up to you and go, it sounds a bit boxy or tubby or sibilant or muddy or anything like that. What they're really saying is, there's too much like 400 hertz or there's too much 6K, but they haven't got the numbers to put for that, so they've got a word to describe it instead. So once you kind of understand what they mean by like muddy, you're thinking, okay, it's like the low mid, kind of low region there. So that can be really helpful, particularly if like a pastor or someone is communicating to you, oh, it just sounds a bit muddy to you. It's like, okay, you're saying there's too much low mid. Obviously you don't say that back to them because they won't know what you mean, but it's just a useful kind of way of mapping words to frequencies.
Can I just ask quickly, how do you feel about effects pedals, and how do you mix, if the effects pedals mix is really bad, what do you say to the...
Let's talk about that maybe at the end of the Q&A bit. I've got a bit about effects shortly, but I'll just keep touching on this bit. Is that all right? Yeah. One thing I want to mention as well is this region is the bit where our ears are most sensitive. So I don't know about you, but if you've ever stood and you're near kind of a low-end sub or there's loads of bass in the room, it doesn't really sound loud to you. You kind of feel it more than it sounds loud. Whereas if you're kind of stood and a speaker's like feeding back and it's squealing, it's that horrible sound, isn't it? It's so piercing. It's that region. And I find it really interesting because I think this is a kind of almost a beautiful thing from God, is that the reason that we're so sensitive to that region is things like a baby screaming. Any guesses where that falls in the spectrum? Yeah, right there. So at 3 a.m. you can thank God for that. But that's the reason that we're so sensitive to that for kind of those protective maternal instincts. But it also means that when we're mixing sound, this is the region that most people will say, oh, it's a bit loud or a bit piercing. It's probably because what you've got going on here isn't particularly well balanced. Obviously you need a good balance across everything, but that's around the kind of 3,000 hertz to 5,000 hertz region is the bit where it's kind of most painful for us as humans. If you're not sure about EQ, and all of that sounded quite a lot, whoa, gosh, how do I do this when I've got, for example, like, I don't know, a trumpet or a vocalist, and what do I do with my EQ? It takes years to get to that point where you know all of the frequencies for individual instruments off the top of your head. So there's this really cool interactive frequency chart, and I can give you the link afterwards, but if I go to it now, I found this really helpful in my early days of being a sound guy, because oh, I hope there's loads. Hey, so I'm sorry, this is probably quite small on the screen. I'll see if I can zoom in a bit. But what you can do is you can just hover over any one of these things and it will show you on the right-hand side, like, for example, we're looking at a snare drum here. It's saying the ring is about 900 hertz, the attack is 2.5K, the snap is 10K. So it kind of gives you starting points with your EQ that you might tweak, for example. Before, you know, and over time you'll just learn that. But you can see the frequency here, kind of a bit those sections I was talking about and where each thing falls. So that was really helpful for me. I can give you the link afterwards if you want, but it's quite an old style thing, but it's brilliant. I find that really helpful. I was going to show you as well here. So I just talked a lot there about EQ and compression. You probably want to hear the difference it makes. So I've got an example of one of our earlier live streams where we pre-recorded it. I did a mix on Logic and then we sent it out and played it on YouTube. And I'm going to play you a bit of it and we can have a listen to Beth's vocal before and after all of this. You might have to bear with my laptop if it starts and stops because it's got a lot going on at the moment. So I'll just play you a little bit of the track. Here we go. I think we're just dropping up here. So this is what it sounds like after the mix is completed. So there's my laptop pausing. A convenient point though. So this is the vocals together with Beth and the BVs. You go before us. Nothing can stand against the power of us. So it sounds cool, but I wanted to just solo in on Beth's vocals so you can hear what it sounds like when we recorded it. I did my EQ and compression and reverb, and then what it sounds like after that. So this is it on its own after I've done all my work to it. And I'll turn off all the stuff I did. So that's before. And then after. So quite a big difference. I hope you can hear that as well. So I'll just show you step by step roughly what each one of those things is doing. So if I take it all the way back, the first thing is just a gain. And now I know this is a Logic small screen, I'm sorry about that, but it's the same workflow I was telling you about, like gain, EQ, level and compression, that sort of thing. It's the same thing, just in this format here. And you could do exactly the same thing on your sound desk, or if you mix your live stream through a thing like Logic, it's all the same principles there as well. So first thing is gain. I mean, I'm literally only doing half a dB there, so literally nothing. And then the first thing I do is an EQ. And the reason I like this EQ, it's a really nice one. It's an SSL one, but it's an analog one. So one of the things I like about this is I haven't got a fancy graph for me to look at, because sometimes when I've got a fancy graph to look at, I'm like, that doesn't look right. And then I'm like, hold on, I'm a sound engineer. It doesn't matter what it looks like. It's more important what it sounds like. So this is a really useful one. So I'm kind of just high passing it up to 180 Hertz, taking a tiny bit of the low and low mid out, and then adding a bit more on the top. So it kind of just takes a bit of the low and adds a bit more top end in. So I'll play it and I'll turn this off and on, and hopefully you can hear the difference. I'm just going to try and loop it around here.
Lord, you go before
So without,
us. Nothing can
with,
stand against the power
without,
of my God. You shine in the shadows.
with.
You in every.
It's a subtle small change, but you sort of hear some of the low end had kind of gone a bit in from her voice. A bit that kind of, almost want to use the word boxiness, but it's kind of that yeah, too much low in there. The next thing I did is actually I compressed it. So what I did here, and this will tickle some of you more technical people, but for some people who aren't used to this, it's okay. I kind of used two compressors, one after the other. So we've just done our EQ here. We went into this one and then into this one and out. So on most sound desks, you don't have two compressors. You might only have one, but that's okay. You can still achieve a similar thing with that. The reason I did two here is I was trying to be fancy, but what it does is this one, if you think about Beth's vocal doing that, I do have a flip chart, but not everyone's going to see this, but I'll try and draw it quickly. So Beth's vocal, kind of, any vocal here, is kind of doing a lot of up and down. So the first one I'm doing is just taking off like the really top end peaks, the kind of really loud ones, just to catch them. And then the second one just does a tiny bit more to smooth it all out. So by doing that, you have kind of a one that gets the peaks and then one that just levels it all out. So you end up with a kind of a gentler, smoother one. And that sounds more natural than one of these working a lot harder. It just does something with the way that they work that it sounds a bit better. So I'll turn them on one by one, and you should hear the difference of it being a lot more. So think about it now. We're thinking about level and not tone. So it probably won't change the sound of her voice in terms of the tone, but it will change how loud and consistent her vocal is in volume. So
Lord, you go
without,
before us. Nothing can stand against the power of my God.
and you can see
You shine
the
in
meters.
the shadows. You in.
For those who can see the screen, I'm sorry. The meters there, kind of when they dip back a bit, they're saying I'm chopping a little bit off. So for example, that'd be chopping a bit off there, chipping a bit, so meter will drop back there. And then for this one, it'd probably be doing a similar thing, just a bit more often. So I'll play it again, watch the meters, and just make a mental note, and then I'll turn them off again.
Lord, you go before us. Nothing can stand against the power of my God. You shine in the shadows. You
They're off now.
every battle. Nothing can stand against. Lord, you go before us.
Yeah, do you guys hear the difference there? It's a bit more subtle, but you kind of hear how it kind of flattens it out a little bit in terms of the level, the volume over time. So this is where we're at now. The next thing I did was kind of like another EQ, but this one, again, for some of you guys and girls who might find this a bit more interesting, it's what we call a dynamic EQ. So it's an EQ. This is where I didn't really want to go this complicated, but I'll briefly touch on it. It kind of merges the best of both an EQ and a compressor together. So we can say, I just want you to turn down this EQ band when that EQ band gets too loud. It's kind of like a compressor, but only for a certain region of the sound. So if you watch this, you will see the white line probably moving a little bit here and there. But again, this is just to it kind of takes a bit of the low mid out, as you can see there. This one I think is the dynamic one, and then just adds a kind of bit of top end sparkle up here that just helps her vocal to cut through the mix. So again, I'll turn this off and on and you'll hear the difference. It's off at the moment to start with.
Lord, you go before us.
On.
Nothing can stand against the power of my God.
Off.
You shine in the shadows. You in every battle.
Hear the difference? And you can see how that is occasionally dipping down a little bit. Yeah. So that's kind of another stage of EQ. Again, if you don't have this on your sound desk, that's totally fine. You can achieve what I just showed you there with a normal EQ. I would probably just be cutting a little bit more of that low mid out of my normal EQ if that's what I needed. The next thing I added was Sibilance thing. So sometimes you get S's and T's that pop through a little bit too much, and this just helped to reduce how much S's and T's come through, because they can sort of just be a bit aggressive on your ears sometimes. So I'll play that. And you can see it dropping it out for any S's and T's. So that's the Sibilance just doing its thing. I'm just going a little bit quicker now because I'm conscious of time. One thing that is always a controversial topic is auto-tune.
I was waiting for it.
Yeah, you could see it. So I do actually have a slide for it, but I'll just talk around it. The thing with it is, if you're going for like a proper share sound effect where you're really going really hard on the auto-tune, it's doing a lot of things, you depend on it, that's where you're going wrong with auto-tune. When you're using it to just tighten the vocals up a bit more, it's totally fine. So the reason that we use it for the live stream and we don't use it in the room is that when you listen back, you might have kind of come across this when you're listening to your own mixes, it conveys bum notes a lot easier when you listen back to it on your phone or your laptop. There's just something about being at home, you're like, oh gosh, I can really hear those bum notes. Whereas it's the same thing that went on in the room, but you don't notice it as much. It's weird, isn't it? It's because you've got kind of the ambience and the congregation together, and your brain doesn't really pick up on them as much. So that's why we use auto-tune for the live stream, because it just helps tighten those up, and for me it helps it become less noticeable if there are bum notes going on. But what we can do is I'll play it with Beth and you'll see it's not doing much at all to her vocal. The pink bit is it dragging it up or down to be in tune. But she's a great vocalist anyway, so it's not doing much. If it was working a lot harder and doing a lot more correction, I'd be a bit like, this is not right, because you want to fix it with the vocalist more than you depend on the sound thing to do it for you.
Lord, you go before us. Nothing can stand.
See it just doing a little bit to tighten it up and down.
You shine in the shadows. You in every battle.
So not doing too much really, it's just helping tighten her vocal up, which is really important. And then the final thing is just a bit of reverb. So I'll play it without the reverb and I'll turn the reverb on.
Lord, you go before us. Nothing can stand against the power of my God.
Without.
You shine in the shadows. You in every battle.
Yeah?
Nothing can stand.
So that's where we're at to. I'll just play it again from where we started so you can hear the difference again.
Lord, you go before us.
That's what we started with.
Nothing can stand against the power of my God. You shine in
And that's where we ended up.
shadows.
It's more to say that there is so much you could do with EQ, compression and reverb. You can really make a massive difference, particularly to vocals. Does that make sense? Conscious of time, so one thing I want to really jump to, we've got lots of other things we can talk about later if you want to, but is the ambient mics and the overall level of the live stream. So this is always fun. One thing when you're doing sound in the room is you can turn it up and down a lot more. You can make much more sweeping, drastic changes to the overall level. When you're doing the live stream mix, you cannot do that. Okay, it's really important that the level that gets sent out to YouTube or Facebook or Zoom or whatever it is you stream on is pretty consistent. Okay, that's not to say you can't have some dynamics in that. Like you might have kind of like that for your live stream going out to YouTube or Facebook or whatever. In the room, it might be doing like 10 times as much as that, like up and down. The reason is, if someone's on their phone or laptop, I don't know if you've ever experienced it when the ad break comes on when you're watching Britain's Got Talent, and it's way too loud. You end up turning it down and up and down. that's because they're not doing what I just described and keeping it in that consistent window almost. So that's what we try and do with our live stream. So I've drawn it here. Speech, for example, in red. And I've naturally drawn the band is slightly louder than speech because you kind of want them to be, because a band should sound a bit louder than, say, one handheld microphone, but only a bit. And I've also drawn them as kind of, well, badly drawn them as sort of fades, because with the live stream, we try and avoid using the mute button, because if you mute on the live stream, you might have a little bit of background hiss that just immediately cuts off. It just sounds very like sharp and aggressive. So what we try and do is always bring stuff in and out almost over 1 or 2 seconds, because it's just a lot more natural for the person listening at the other end. So that's why, like, Mike might do an introduction and then I'll fade out the speech and I'll fade up the band as he's finishing his joke or whatever it is, and then the band will do their thing and it might get a bit quieter for ministry, fade it out, fade up the speech. So there's always this nice smooth crossfade, and I'm always watching my kind of output meters to make sure that they're tickling that orange, particularly when it gets quiet, because sometimes Mike might make a kind of point and he'll go like this, and then you go, oh gosh, right, I need to turn that up, because you might still hear it what you're listening to on your headphones or whatever you're mixing on, but someone on their phone at home or their laptop or their TV might be like, I can't hear it, and they're always turning it up and down. So it sounds a bit silly, but you need to be constantly on those faders. The other one I've drawn a lot more wiggly over here is this yellow ambience line, because ambient mics are so critical to our live stream mix. I almost can't understate it. So the 4 main faders that we use are band, vocal, ambience and speech. They're kind of like the 4 things that we kind of group together. So band and vocal is obviously kind of together. I just sort of balance the 2 as I go. Ambient mics, I've got a bit about that, and the speech is obviously whenever Mike or Andy or anyone is speaking, we're turning that up and down. So the ambient mics are so helpful for you to, because one of the tips that one of my sound team said was that the congregation are almost an instrument of themselves. So we want to convey that on the live stream, because that's part of the thing of people feeling like they're in the room when they're watching the live stream. Another old boss of mine, it always wound me up. He always said, put them in the room, put them in the room, whenever I was doing a live stream mix. I'm like, what do you mean? And he meant that the ambient mics are too quiet, because when you're listening, it's very unnatural on your phone or your laptop to be listening to just the handheld mic, as silly as that sounds, because it's a bit like you putting your ear up to Mike's mouth like that. You don't listen like that when you're in the room, do you? You hear Mike's mic and you hear the sound of the room together, and people laughing or people crying, whatever it might be. That is what gives the feeling of kind of being in the room. So we're constantly bringing that ambient fader up and down. The downside of it, I've just bigged it up a lot, is as you push it up, you just hear the sound of a warehouse in Watford next to a train station. So it's not always helpful to have it up, because the congregation might not be singing particularly loud, or it might be a big chorus when it doesn't really add much. When it becomes really invaluable is when the band is almost sort of finishing a song. I'll bring the ambience up, because the congregation will be singing out and stuff like that. That's when the ambient mics coming through is so helpful. So dropping out the ambient mics sometimes for the loud choruses and then bringing them up towards the end of the song is super helpful. So I've got an example of that, which I did the other week on our live stream. And again, it's not perfect, but it will show you examples. So 1440 is loads of ambience. And then we'll go to 20, which has got hardly any, and then 21, 25. One sec. If we go back, this is where there's loads of ambience. Can you hear congregation? And you can still hear vocals. Yeah, really helpful there. I'm going to jump to a bit where I turn the ambience really low in the mix, because it wasn't really adding a lot, because it was the band were loud and singing out anyway, and it would have just sounded mushy and kind of reverby if I'd have turned it up. So can you hear how at this point it's very focused on the band. The band are nice and punchy because they've got a big chorus going. So I'm just going with the band and the vocal, and I've got the ambience way down lower. Still there, but like super low. And then the last one is, as they finish this sort of song here, and I've got the ambience really low, I can tell they're finishing. So what I'm doing is I'm preemptively bringing up the ambience slowly over time, again, fading, doing it slowly, and bringing it up back like nice and loud so that as the congregation sings out towards the end of the song, you can hear them. So I'll skip forward to that bit. 21, 25. So, band are finishing, ambience up slowly. Hear it getting wider. Still going. Hear congregation. Start to hear more of the congregation. There. And the visuals, have you noticed the visuals are now matching what I'm doing on the stream? And there's the congregation. Does that make sense? Like, I think that's one important thing as well, is as I'm doing this and I'm going, right, I need to put more ambience up, the visuals person is hearing the same thing and cutting to kind of shots of the congregation and a bit wider, because it helps the two marry together, if that makes sense. So that's really important, like the ambient mics, that's just so critical for that. I'm just going to mention what we've got and where. I'll skip through a few final slides and then we can finish and you can ask question and answers if you want to or leave. Ambient mics, we've basically got, this is kind of the best picture I could find, three, I've got an overhead diagram I'll show you in a minute, but basically three at the cross, and they're kind of what we would term as shotgun microphones. So they are specifically designed for picking up stuff in a very kind of specific region. A normal microphone is a lot kind of wider in what it picks up. So when it picks up a lot wider, you end up picking up more of the sound of the warehouse, of the PA, of everything else you're not so bothered about. What we do is when we put them at the cross, have a look later when you get back in there, they're very directional, so they're picking up, so if I was to point one at you guys, it would pick up you 5 or 6 here, for example. Because they're much further back, it can sort of picks up more than that, like probably 50 or 100 people. But we've got 3 of those at the front to kind of do each section, and then 2 at the back, which are more like normal condenser microphones, which pick up kind of the room as such. So it kind of gives you that overall wider sound. So those 3 we typically use to get the congregation and them singing, and these 2 at the back gives us kind of the wider room sound, and we blend them together basically. So looking overhead kind of looks a bit like that, really. Now, I'm not saying you guys need to all go out and buy 5 microphones. What I'm probably saying is you need 1 would be fine, 2 would be ideal, kind of a bit like these 2 here. If we didn't have as much budget, I'd just grab these 2, just some condenser microphones like the ones you use for your drums overheads, things like that, kind of cardioid. I'd pop them behind the PA system where it's quieter, not near something loud like drums, for example, and you're sort of pointing them at the congregation to try and pick up the sound of people singing. So they can be a bit hard to make work, and they can often be a bit noisy because you need to have a lot of gain, which is again why we're sort of bringing them up and down, but just blending them into the mix. Does that make sense? Brilliant. I'm conscious of time, so I'm just going to see what's the key other things to talk about. Probably, I'm going to mention effects. No, I'll very quickly talk about talkback, because that's one thing that's really helpful for us. So you may not all be used to this, but the worship leader's got one of these pedals here, okay? So their microphone goes into this pedal. What I'm about to describe works well if you use in-ear systems where all your band are on in-ears. If you've got wedges, you can't do this because you'll realise why I got really. So his mic goes into there, and then his or her, and then you've got 2 outputs from it. So I've got a terrible diagram, I think there's another one like that there. And you've got 2 outputs. One goes to the PA system and the band, and then the other one just goes to the band. So often Tom or Beth or whoever or Dan will lean on it and go, we're going to go to, I don't know, King of Kings, and then they're off it. So we'll all know in advance what they're going to before congregation or live stream will hear it. So it's a really helpful way for people to communicate. It's a really useful system, that in particular. Doesn't mean you need to go and do that. It just helps Tom or Beth or Dan or whoever provide direction to the band so they know where they're about to go and what they're about to do. That's also really useful if you're on live stream, because if they go, we're going to do King of Kings in A, you know to put the auto tune in A, because if you put the auto tune in the wrong key, yes, it's going to sound awful. So that's really important for us as well. I mean, it gets way more complicated than that with our setup, but that's that there. I think the last 3 tips I want to share with you, and then we can do Q&A, is one thing that I've found and the guys have found really helpful is recording your mixes. Well, obviously because they're live streamed, they're probably up on live for you to listen back to. I often then go back and we'll listen to it on my laptop, on my phone, in my car, whatever, and just try and see how it translates across those different speakers and different devices, because it's going to sound different on each one, just because they're different speakers on each device and so on. So you want to just get an average of what sounds good across all of them. It's never going to sound perfect on all of them. So you just need to go, oh, I didn't do particularly well this week on drums. None of them it particularly worked. So next week when I come back, I'm going to really work on making my drum sound really good. And then once you've got that nailed, you then do the next thing. Do you know what I mean? Again, that snowballing thing. Just make one change at a time each week, for example. So that's really useful. Doing your homework. So it's always helpful to go and read new tips, come to seminars like this, pick up some new ideas, take them away and try them, but try them during rehearsal, not necessarily during like the actual service or whatever, because you can try them in rehearsal, go, oh, that sounds much better. Give it a go, make the change, commit to it. And if it doesn't work, you just leave it. And like I mentioned earlier, a bit like the audio and video need to work together. So if audio puts up lots of ambient mics, the video guys or girls should also be putting up probably congregational shots, and vice versa. If the video starts putting up lots of congregational shots, maybe you should put ambience up. So kind of, that's one thing with our live stream that works well. It's that kind of cross collaboration and working together. I think I'm going to leave it there because I've got more slides. But the last thing is, except it won't be perfect, this image really itches something in me that I just find so difficult. Oh, I don't want to rotate it. So that's your live stream mix, okay? It's not going to be perfect, but you've got to look back on it and enjoy it. And remembering as well that what you do is very kind of humbling, because it's quite a thankless job. Not many people are going to come up to you and go, oh, you did a great job or whatever. Like, you're just there pushing faders, probably in the broom cupboard over there somewhere or somewhere different. So yeah, so don't let yourself get proud or expect kind of gratification from doing it. It's kind of a really servant-hearted role, being realistic and loving and enjoying it. So cool. Have you guys got questions? It's exactly 1 o'clock now, so if you want to nip off, more than welcome to, because I know it's lunchtime. But if you want to stick around and ask some questions, we'd like 15 minutes questions. Yes, sir.
Just a quick one. Where you showed the reverb that you're using, presumably for the live stream, do you also have some in the room?
Yes, so I can.
Not as much, I would imagine.
Yeah, so I'll touch on the reverby bits. So there's kind of a few reverbs that I tend to use, and they're usually on snare, the drums, any instruments and vocals is how I break them down. They're normally all reverbs. So like, I have a bit of a reverb on the snare. It's quite a Christian sound to hit the snare and you kind of get boom, this kind of sound. Drums, particularly if they're in a drum cage, having them in a drum cage, it can make it sound kind of boxy and dunk, 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 dunk. So putting a bit of a room reverb on them can help just bring the kit sound a bit more alive. The vocals is the key one though. Like instruments, I might put it on acoustic guitar, for example. I had a tiny bit on Tom's acoustic guitar, but only a little bit so that if he's picking, it just helps take the edge off a little bit. And obviously strings. But vocals, yeah, I've normally got a short and a long kind of reverb, two together, and then I blend them to taste. Kind of we follow the same thing in live stream, but we might just have more or less reverb because the ambience is kind of a reverb in itself as well. So
the other thing was just generally about panning for live.
Have you seen my presentation? Because the next slide is... So panning is, again, a controversial topic, because one thing is not everyone who's going to be listening to your live stream will be listening to it in stereo. Some people will, probably most, maybe, depends. So you can use panning really effectively. Like there's this cool diagram I saw on this one, but where you've kind of got your kick and your bass in mono in the middle, and then you kind of spread everything else around it, which is a good way to kind of use this whole spectrum of frequencies and width. We don't tend to pan like our backing vocals too far. We might pan them like yay far, but not all the way right out, because it just helps keep the vocals in the middle. Otherwise, you sort of hear a backing vocal from over here and a backing vocal from over here, and it's a bit too much.
And the people on the right don't hear the ones on the left.
Yes, particularly when you're doing in front of house. Yeah, exactly. So we do a little bit, but not much. So yeah, that's all right. Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, I'll ask a very basic question.
Go on.
We don't separately mix our live stream at the moment. For
Okay.
A, we don't have the kit, B, we haven't got anybody to do it.
Okay, yeah.
If we wanted to do that, what would you recommend the sort of kit we should start with to do this?
Okay, good question.
Ideally, fairly cheaply.
Yeah. You could probably use what you've got at the moment and do like another aux send. So I don't know if you guys use auxes for things like wedges or in-ears or anything like that. Is that what you do? Yeah. Okay. So often sound desk will have this kind of aux like dial or fader that you can turn, and it would take a channel and it send it off somewhere at that level before your main fader. So what you can do is, if you want more or less acoustic guitar in your live stream mix, you just tweak that aux fader or aux dial or whatever, and it won't affect what you put out in your speakers. So that row there, as long as it's what's called pre-fader, that means before your fader, it's a little button usually. That means you can sort of do a separate mix and then listen to the live stream, go, oh gosh, I need to change this, tweak that, and then you can carry on mixing. It's a hard job though, isn't it? Because you're trying to listen to the room and do everything and also put headphones on. So that's a good one to try. The caveat with that is a bit like, okay, well, if someone comes up with a handheld microphone, you might need to make it change in two places, and unless you do post fader. But yeah, make them post fade, but then you're sort of fighting one another, so it's a bit like. But yeah, I would try seeing what you can do with your current setup.
Well, as you mentioned that you have your live stream mix in a different room.
Yes, yeah, we do. So what we do is we kind of take all our signals from stage, and it goes off to front of house, and it also goes up to live stream as two separate desks. So we have to have two people every Sunday that we're live streaming. And then someone upstairs will be tweaking the sound for the live stream, and so that is a bit more of an involved setup that I can't just say go and buy this, because it depends entirely on what you've got or what you want to use. So it's a bit more complicated than that, but that is helpful because you can just focus on one thing. It's always, I hate doing it as well whenever you're trying to do front of house and the live stream, because ultimately you're probably doing the ears or wedges as well, aren't you? So there's a lot of things to think about there. So I don't know if that answered your question very well though. Yeah. Yes.
Just coming back to the sound check.
Yeah.
So when you're doing a sound check and guitars have got different effects, pedals, and it just doesn't sound good, how would you deal with it?
Oh,
For them, of course, it sounds great.
do you think it doesn't sound good on their own, or in the mix? Like, is it particularly that when you turn everything else up, it doesn't fit in the mix, or just on their own?
It just doesn't sound good, and you try to tell the guy to, just turn it off.
Yeah, I think that's quite a political conversation, isn't it, then, to have. It kind of comes back to what I was saying a bit earlier. Sometimes, and I was actually having this conversation with Paul on keys earlier, because he was mentioning how he sometimes uses quite a bit of compression on his keyboard. Some sound guys love that, some guys don't like that, and it's like, I was sort of debating internally, like, at what point is it the sound person's responsibility or not? Do you know what I mean? Like, how far? So I've had a similar thing with electric guitarists, but not quite that situation. But they're not quite, particularly when you've got like two electric guitarists and they're stepping on each other's toes because they're playing the same riff, for example. Yeah. So I'll go up to them, I'll say, hey guys, just a note, like, and then sort of explain the thing. Because one thing you've got that they don't have is you've got overall sight of the whole mix, and you hear everything together, whereas what they probably hear is just, oh, I sound great on my own, or I can hear me and the worship leader and it sounds great. So they're focusing on just them. Sometimes taking them out of that, recording it, come and have a listen and go, oh, this is the reason it didn't quite work for me, can help them see it from a different perspective, if you know what I mean. I mean, it's a hard thing, because
so it's more for acoustic as well, because I mean, if they've got a delay and a reverb on theirs and they use that, and would you put a delay or a reverb on or more a reverb on the acoustic?
I like to do it myself and not have them do it because I got the control to turn the reverb up and down if I need to. Then if it's a pedal over there, I can't change anything if it's too much or too little. They probably use a pedal because they want to hear it back themselves. So if that's the case, you can say, hey, would you mind if I try to do the reverb and I'll send it back to your in-ears or your wedge? So it's the same thing, but I can turn it up and down at front of house separately. Sometimes that can work, but again, it's almost like a playing style thing, a musicianship thing that's quite hard to, yeah.
It's tricky because you want one homogenous sound, really, in terms of like if everyone's got their own little silos of reverb, trying to make it tarry up, like I said, all in one room is a bit difficult. But I think it is really those interpersonal relationships with the musicians and having the confidence and relationship to be able to go up them and have the discussions.
Yeah, exactly.
Can be difficult. I think amps on stage is another good example of that. When you've got people like rocking out with their bass amp or electric amp, and actually they're killing your front of house.
Yeah,
that's quite a tricky one to have.
Yes, that's always a Yes, mate.
I was pretty much about to say what he said because I play electric a lot in my worship band.
Okay.
I also do sound.
Yeah.
Not on band a lot of the time. Just going up to them and just kind of being like, this isn't working for X reason.
Yeah.
Could we try something different? Especially like if you've got like a solution to the problem that's like quite simple for them to change. Like
just as long as you do it really sensitively, and it's much easier if you've got a relationship with them.
Yeah.
And you know, if we knew each other and you're like, oh, mate, it's just not quite working for me, and they don't mind. So it just takes time, doesn't it?
I find it's great when you can like go to them and kind of be like, oh, that's like cutting into like the overall mix quite a lot, and it's just starting to drown out like the vocals or something. And
Yeah.
Be like, could we just like try scaling back like the high end on that a bit or something like that? And generally most of them are quite receptive to changing it.
That's good. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Any other questions?
It would be nice if you had a split jack that one goes into his headphones and the other one goes into the sound system.
Well, sometimes the pedals do have a true. Sometimes the pedals do have a wet and dry output, so you could take two outputs, but it's just a pain, isn't it? So, yeah. Yes.
Do you use the ambient mics for people's in-ears to give them a better sense of hearing? And how do you manage
Question.
that?
Yeah, so we do have the ambient mics go to front of house and the live stream. Front of house obviously doesn't put them in the room because it would just feed back, but we do send it to their little personal, so we use you probably see them like personal monitor things. So there is a channel that goes to them called Ambience. Those little ME1s they're called also have a local mic on them, which is kind of like an ambient mic built into them as well. So sometimes they use that. I try and say, the ambient mics would be better, but the problem with that is, like I said, turning it up and down, they'll want it off when they're playing the chorus, and they'll want it up when it becomes ministry time. And if they're doing guitar or keys, they haven't got enough hands to change that quickly and easily on their personal mixers. So you probably will see it or do it, is they usually just pop their ear out. I think that wouldn't happen if you had, so I said there's a front of house person, a live stream person. You can, if you want to go to town, add a monitor person in who's by the side of stage, and all they do is mix the band's in-ears for them, so they can then turn the ambience up and down for them. That is a massive luxury that barely any churches I know do that, because it's, you don't need 3 people on every Sunday morning. So we do send it to their mixers. They can use it if they want to. I imagine not many of them probably use it because it probably clutters up the mix a lot for them in their ears, because in-ear mixes should be quite dry and boring to help people pitch, particularly vocals. So vocals should be themselves very loud, keyboard to help them pitch, and maybe the other vocals to help them slot themselves in. Sometimes some people love reverb in their monitors, in their ears, and that's okay if they want to, but it often disguises pitching issues because they think, I sound really nice. And yeah, exactly. It's like we could send them a compressed auto-tune reverb and they would, they'd love it, but they wouldn't correct themselves in there. Yeah. So actually what I want to send them is almost the worst thing I can send them, so that but that's not fair to say, because we do send them it post EQ, but pre the compressor. So this is quite an important point, because if I sent Beth her flattened vocal, like we did earlier, and I sent her this line here, she will actually be even worse then, because it won't matter how close or far away from the mic she goes, she'll just sing and it will correct it for her. So what I want to send her is her original one so that she helps, naturally does it for me, so my compressors don't have to work so hard. Does that make sense? So sorry, I went a bit off topic there. But yeah, so the ambient mics we send them, but I think most people take their one ear out.
Is there a way to avoid that? Because we have a really big auditorium space, so we're needing ambient mics.
Yeah.
We really can't hear what the congregation is doing, but we are having to do one ear in with them. Obviously that's bad.
Yeah, it's not good for your hearing actually to do that. There's a whole topic around that, because what you end up doing is you take one ear out and you end up compensating and turning up the in ears because you've lost 2 ears. So you actually damage one ear, and yeah. Anyway,
Is there a way to avoid that? Is it to do with placement of
popping the ambient mics up around the room, or 2, whatever you do. You could, and it's quite challenging though. I guess you only got one person on front of house. Yeah, you could give them a fader which kind of turns up or down how much goes to the band. But they kind of need to almost innately know how much the band will want, and it's a really hard level setting game because you also can't do it in sound check because there is no congregation. So you almost just need to try it one Sunday, say, hey, at this point when the congregation sings out, I'll turn it really loud, you guys set the level, and then I'll try and ride that. But then that front of house person needs to remember to do that, which is a massive challenge. So I don't really have an answer for you because it's
not use wedges.
Oh, boo! No, I'm not saying that's wrong, because that is a valid point, because wedges you can.
Set some.
If you not send the ambience pre-fade to the in-ears, then they set their level, and then what you do with the fader won't be effective with them.
You can, but the problem is if they set the ambience so that they can hear it when the congregation is singing out between songs, the likelihood is when they go for a big song, it's just going to be clattering around and so noisy and verby. So it's kind of this annoying challenge so that's why in the festivals we would have someone on the side of stage whose job was more or less doing that and taking any requests, the changes, and fixing problems on stage. So no easy answer for that one, I'm afraid.
But I must say, I'm a worship leader myself, so ambient sound is so important.
Yeah.
I can't imagine churches doing it without just having headphones in and not hearing the congregation. It's awful.
Yeah.
The local mic on the ME1 box is great for it.
Yeah, the little local mic thing. So that,
Just change that yourself whenever you need
just grab
to,
it and tweak.
And, it actually gives you sound from your perspective as well, so it feels...
Yeah, exactly, from where you're at, yeah. I'm conscious it's past 1, so if you guys want to nip off, more than welcome to. I'm going to stay and take other questions, but yeah, more than welcome to stay. Yeah.
Quick question. I'm assuming you have a desk or live stream mixer?
Yes, yeah, upstairs. You're welcome. Thanks, guys.
If that's difficult financially, is there a software option which obviously wouldn't get you, the same level of control?
Yeah.
Where you could control some of the mix?
Yeah. So
like a laptop?
Yeah, or an iPad or something. You're welcome.
If it's paid, I'd imagine it's not free software. But
do you know what desk you've got at front of house?
It's an old
digital one? Analog, okay.
Heath.
Okay, yeah, analog stuff. So if you have I'm going to say the word upgrade, if you switch to a digital sound desk at front of house, someone's tweaking levels there, someone else, and a lot of churches do this, do take an iPad separately, have a little headphones thing or whatever, or some speakers, and then they'll mix from the iPad, or it could be a laptop as well. Yeah.
But that's not possible with an analog desk?
No, sadly not. The only other way is you get another analog desk, split it, and then you'd have basically two analog desks. But you're then kind of buying another older desk, which are kind of...
So. And then you also have to pay to split the feed.
Yeah, which is difficult.
Cheap either.
Yeah.
I mean, we're looking to upgrade, but in the meantime, I'm trying to find out if there's any, because at the moment, what we have is whatever is in-house is online as well, and it's terrible. One of them is going to be terrible.
Making that change so that...
It's normally online.
Is it sending by an aux?
You're welcome.
Separate aux? Oh, okay. Because if you had a separate aux, you could solo that output feed on a lot of analog desks. So you could sit there, solo it, and literally listen to the live stream and literally mix it on the dials.
That's probably the best option, yeah. At least that's the no cost option, because your aux is probably you got wedges for so you know how like those dials you tweak to adjust the level of wedge. You just have another one of those just for the live stream, basically.
I'm not a sound person, I'm the worship pastor, but as a sound person, would it be a lot of responsibility for you to try and do, as one person, to try and do both mixes? Like if I were to expect that from my team, because I'm imagining you can't have another guy
so what
next to you.
If you have a post fader one, what that means is as they turn the faders up and down for the room, it will also affect that one going to the live stream. But if you need to turn something up or down for the live stream, you can also do that, so they can go, oh yeah,
the same person do both?
So that the way you're describing it, it's less work than it pre-fades.
Yeah.
But it's
still some work.
Another separate layer to think about.
It's another layer to think about for sure, because you sort of might pop your headphones on and go, oh, just in like that. I've done it a few times. It can be stressful, but it would definitely help. But the best solution is having a second person do it, but then that depends on the size of your team and budget and or you upgrade, like you say you can do. Almost any digital desk you'll buy will be able to do the iPad thing, and then someone else I
think it's the decision you make. Do you want to do one well and one not great, or do you want to do two okay? Because with one person you won't be able to do both well. It's not possible because you'll have headphones only be listening.
We have one arguably well,
in
person, and online is terrible. So all I'm trying to do is until such time as we've got budget to get a digital desk or something.
What's the main?
Try and just improve the live stream just a little bit.
The biggest difference will be putting it on that separate channel.
Okay.
What is the main problems you're having with it? I know that sounds silly, but when you listen to it back, what do you make? It's a grade 1 listed building. So in person, Thank you. Thanks for this.
So in person, there's a lot of like masonry work and stuff. So the ambient sound is huge. So we can't have too much reverb or anything like that in person. Otherwise, it just Which means that online it's flat.
It's really flat.
Completely flat.
No emotion, no feeling.
So even with ambient mics, it doesn't really. It helps to some degree, but the vocals and sound that comes out is.
So that's where, like, if you got ambient mics already.
Well, I mean, I say we've got ambient mics, but we have SO58 signed up.
That's good. I mean, it's fine. Totally, no judgment. It's cool.
Yeah.
I think the issue with those is, like I said, they will just pick up sound from almost anything forward of them.
Yeah.
If you get more specific ones that are what we call like shotgun ones, which are more directional, you can put those up and point them at the congregation, and there'll be more chance that it will pick up people singing then. It's an investment, and there's no guarantee with it, because it also depends on how loud the congregation are actually singing, because they may or may not be. So that probably will help as well, because you get more of the congregational sound then as well. It's a challenge.
You'll have so you'll have no reverb on your stream.
Yeah.
So we had that same problem, even though we've got a digital desk, right? So now, what I have to do if I'm mixing is I have to listen. I mix while they're rehearsing, and then before the congregation comes in, I go outside, close the doors, and we've got speakers in the cafe area. I have to listen to it there, because when I'm in the room, I can hear the drums too loud.
Yes.
And there's a lot of reverb from the room, because we're in a warehouse as well. So I go outside, listen to it, and then I turn the reverb up for the external mix, and then come back into the room to make sure it's not too loud in the room. And then
That's the challenges of mixing it yourself.
The other thing I thought about, right, is if they've got an analog desk and they're feeding out, you feed that into a laptop or a computer to...
No.
Oh, okay. How do you get it into your live stream?
Oh, yeah.
So I'm wondering, on that output, is there a way to add like a reverb pedal or something to add reverb into the feed?
you can still, slightly complicated, but you can still send the vocals to a reverb thingy, whatever you've got, bring that back in on a channel, send that out to your live stream, but it doesn't come through your front of house mix. So like you can still do that as well. It's more difficult, and there's caveats with that, but that might be one of the stepping stones. A lot of this though, when you upgrade, the reverb thing's built in, and you can sort of just mix that separately. So not that your problems will go away, but it might be a thing you do when you upgrade and you get someone in to help you set all that up to make those changes, because that makes sense.
And to your thing about is it difficult so when we first got our digital desk, we had a layer that was for the feed and a layer that was in-house. But what happened was, in the rehearsal, you basically would have to mix for the in-house and then keep toggling between the layers to see where your faders were for the other feed, try to match them up roughly so you have about the same mix on both, and then tweak it. And basically, most of the guys are not sound engineers or anything, right? Neither am I, right? But at least I knew to go between the two. But what you'd end up with is some people would mix for the house, forget about the second set of buttons, right? And then what came out, if you think what comes out when you just send that house mix to the stream is bad, try having a second layer of sliders that are not set anywhere correctly. To your point about you can have good signal in and bad signal out, that's what happened. So we got rid of the second layer because I said to the guy that set the sound desk up for us, I said to him, can you take out the second layer because people aren't actually using it correctly and it's making things worse. So
sometimes the simpler option is always the better. So like in the industry, it's always keep it simple, stupid, because it's much better to have something that might require a second person, but there's consistency and simplicity with that because it also helps with fault finding. If you start doing, I mean, it's crafty solutions you've come up with, but it does make it more difficult, doesn't it? Like week in, week out.
The other thing is going from an analog desk to a digital desk.
Yeah.
Like I'm quite technical, right? But even I found it difficult because it was like you suddenly go from something where you can see everything and you've only got this one bank of sliders to where your desk is 4 times longer than you can see, and all the knobs that you used to be able to just glance down are no longer there. It's on the screen. And actually, it's taken a long time to get used to the transition to a digital desk. So although it eventually becomes an improvement.
Yes.
Actually, your sound. I think your sound gets a lot worse when you make the transition to digital until everybody gets.
Don't become a soundless salesman.
But that, don't underestimate the difficulty of transitioning from.
Yeah, that's one of those change management things. That's just a big step you have to take, sadly, because there's no halfway. Well, maybe you could argue there's some ways to do it, but like training and experience on it. So
it's probably easier if you've only got, because we've got a team of people on sound, so we're on a rota.
Yes.
Which then means that actually, if you're on the desk, you're only on the desk every 4 weeks. So actually, it takes longer to learn the new desk because by the time you come back the next rotation round, right, you've forgotten half the things that you the previous time. So
yeah, exactly.
To go back to your thing as well, whether you can have one person doing it, the post-fade trick does work. If you're doing the aux output, as we see listed, because there's a church in Burgess Hill just outside of Brighton, and my future father-in-law does the sound for the front house, the sound for the stream, and all of the words, and also all the cameras.
Flipping heck!
You want to come down to
he's doing all of that, but he does all of that just by himself. We have 2 analog desks because they took the jump at some point and bought a second analog desk. But there's 2 analog desks there, and so we've got a few more channels to play with. But that is effectively all they're doing. They're just running all of the aux outputs post fader. So you can do the mix all together, then use that to alter certain levels on the stream.
I thought I'd just draw that out because if you're not familiar with it as a sound person, it might help you a bit. So like your analog sound desk will probably look something like this, where you've got your gain at the top, you have some more dials here where your EQ, then you have your auxes here, which is normally your wedges, but we're all talking about post-fade aux there, and then your fader. So when you turn this fader up and down, it obviously turns up and down in the room. Post-fader means the sound will come in through all these things, goes through the level of your fader. So if you turn it up or down, that sound will get turned up or down. Then it kind of almost goes like that and out to your live stream mix. So if you bring that fader up or down, it will come up or down in live stream mix. But if you want more or less of it in the live stream mix, you can tweak this dial here. It's almost like another fader for that one channel going just to the live stream mix. So that means if your pastor comes up or your minister or whatever and you turn them up, it will turn up in the live stream mix, and then you can use that dial post fader to add more or less to change the mix a bit. So again, with reverb you could do something similar, and ambient mics. So
also, if you get a decent set of closed back headphones, it will help with isolation when you're trying to mix the live stream. If you can only do it, because similar situation in my church, as much as you can only do it where you're standing. A decent set of closed back, not noise cancelling, but closed back will, obviously depending on where your mix position is, i.e. where you're mixing the sound from in the distance from the speakers, but that will give you a bit of isolation
rather than a separate room.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, not everyone can, like, you know, it's great to have the ideal setup, but nobody in the world has an ideal setup, at least techies never do. It's never ideal, it can always be one more bit of gear. But yeah, no, a decent set of closed back headphones, Bayer Dynamics are my personal favourite. They're fairly standard in the industry.
It's not kind of ridiculous. In this kind of situation, if you wanted to use pre-fade and a second person, but could you? I think you could just have some sort of
literally someone standing
there who has the headphones on, and the person in front of the house, and so you really have to don't use headphones. The person doing the live stream is like, and it would be annoying and difficult because you're reaching over each other. But
in that situation, with someone else.
I know it's not at all ideal, but I guess really that's the situation where if you're in that situation, you could try it as if you really wanted the second person to be able to do it without having to get more kit.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. That help a little bit?
Yeah, really, really helpful.
Great.
But you can get decent shotguns for not crazy money.
Yeah.
They're not too bad. They're much cheaper than your nice sort of, you know, if you think of your big condenser studio microphone, they're a lot cheaper than that.
Yeah. I think that's probably one of the things really probably motivate for that money.
Because you'll probably find in that room you probably want virtually nil reverb on the actual mix in the house because it's just you've got lovely, wonderful acoustics. It's the kind of room that us techies would turn up with what we call an impulse response machine to actually capture the room and how it sounds.
Well, sometimes it's too much.
I have exactly 2 minutes before sound check, so any other super burning questions? No worries. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.